Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. I've always believed there's something uniquely revealing about the calm moments shared over a morning cup of coffee. Maybe it's the way the sunlight filters gently through kitchen windows, or how the world outside hasn't quite woken up, allowing secrets to spill more freely. My name's Laura, and at 54, I thought I'd heard it all. But life has a way of surprising you in the quietest moments. It started on a Tuesday morning, nothing remarkable at first. I was sipping my coffee, watching birds hop around my backyard feeder, enjoying the fresh spring breeze drifting through my open patio doors. It was then I heard the familiar creak of the gate between our yards. Moments later, Janet, my neighbor of over 20 years, peeked in, smiling sheepishly. "Laura, I hope you don't mind a visitor this early?" she asked gently, stepping onto my patio, her bare feet quiet against the cool stone. Janet was 50, slim with a graceful ease about her, strands of silver softly weaving into her auburn hair. She was always composed, her warmth as steady as her soft, soothing voice. I waved her in, smiling back. "Of course not, Janet. Coffee's fresh. Help yourself." She poured herself a cup, breathing in deeply as she took a seat opposite me at the table. But even as she settled in, I sensed a tension beneath her calm exterior, something unusual weighing on her mind. "Everything all right?" I ventured cautiously, observing her closely. Her fingers wrapped around the coffee mug like it was a lifeline. Janet looked up and gave a half-hearted chuckle, brushing back a stray hair behind her ear. "You know, Laura, after 25 years of marriage, you'd think nothing could surprise me any more about Carl." Carl was Janet's husband, a friendly, straightforward man who always waved from across the fence, never failing to lend a hand when needed. A sturdy presence, reliable as the oak trees lining our street. I tilted my head slightly, intrigued yet cautious. "Well, what's Carl done now? Surely nothing scandalous, I hope." Janet hesitated, her eyes gazing into her coffee as if searching for strength. Scandalous might not be the right word. She began softly. "But unexpected?" "Absolutely." The silence stretched between us briefly, amplifying the early morning birdsong. I felt curiosity tugging at me, my heart beating just a bit faster. "Go on," I encouraged gently. Janet raised her gaze, meeting mine. There was vulnerability there I hadn't seen in her before. "Last weekend, Carl and I drove out to that cabin we rent every spring. You remember the place? The one by Lake Geneva?" I nodded, picturing the quaint lakeside cabin, nestled among pine trees, an ideal escape from our busy suburban neighborhood. Janet and Carl visited every spring, always returning refreshed, closer than ever. "Well," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper, "this year was different. After dinner, Carl got very quiet, and he asked me something that completely threw me." "What did he say?" I pressed softly, my heart now fully engaged in her unfolding story. Janet took a slow breath, steadying herself. "He asked if I was happy. Not just happy enough, but truly, deeply happy." A faint ache fluttered in my chest. It was the kind of question that could shake even the most solid of marriages, unlocking doors people often preferred to keep tightly shut. "And were you honest?" I asked gently. She looked away briefly, a shadow of uncertainty flickering across her eyes. "Yes." At first, I hesitated, but then I just couldn't hold back. I told him everything. How I felt a sense of distance between us lately, how sometimes I missed the spark we had in our younger days. I exhaled slowly, sensing the heaviness in her confession. "And how did Carl respond?" A tender smile crept across Janet's face, surprising me. That's the shocking part, Laura. Instead of getting defensive or upset, Carl opened up in a way I've never seen. He admitted he's been feeling the same, that he longs for the intimacy we've lost over the years. It was like rediscovering a man I thought I knew completely. As Janet spoke, her face softened, her expression brightening slightly despite the vulnerability of the moment. It was clear the conversation had profoundly touched her. Laura, it felt like we were meeting each other again. After years of being comfortably stuck in place, Janet continued, her voice warm and reflective. The honesty was shocking, but it was also beautiful. I leaned back, letting her words settle into the peaceful morning air between us. I felt genuinely moved by her openness, by the delicate revelation she'd shared. This wasn't just neighborhood gossip. It was a genuine human moment, quietly powerful. "How do you feel now after that conversation?" I asked gently, genuinely curious. Janet's eyes sparkled softly, something hopeful emerging beneath the initial tension. "Strangely enough, Laura, it feels like we're just beginning something new, even after 25 years together. I don't know exactly what that means yet, but it feels right, you know." "I think I do," I whispered, touched by her honesty. Janet reached across the table, taking my hand in hers briefly, squeezing it warmly. "Thank you for listening. I didn't realize how much I needed to talk about this until now." "Any time," I assured her, meaning every word. As Janet headed back home, leaving me to finish my coffee in peaceful solitude, her revelation lingered. I thought about my own marriage, about the comfortable silence my husband and I had long embraced. Could we ever have a moment like Janet and Carl's, candid, raw, and beautifully vulnerable? I didn't know it yet, but Janet's unexpected confession was just the start of something that would soon touch my life in ways I'd never imagined. Little did I realize, our quiet suburban lives were about to shift forever, and the story Janet shared with me would open doors I never knew existed. That conversation with Janet lingered in my mind, softly echoing throughout the rest of the day. The ordinary moments of my daily routine, folding laundry, watering the roses lining my front porch, cooking dinner, seemed touched by an unfamiliar sense of possibility. Janet's revelation had sparked a subtle curiosity, an awakening I hadn't anticipated. As I stood at the kitchen sink washing dishes that evening, my husband Richard quietly stepped up behind me, gently placing his hands on my shoulders. I paused, a smile touching my lips at the unexpected tenderness. "Long day?" he murmured softly, his voice as steady and reassuring as always. I nodded, leaning slightly into this familiar warmth. At 56, Richard remained the anchor he'd always been, strong, consistent, quietly devoted. But now, Janet's words had placed a new lens over our comfortable predictability. I found myself wondering, had we too slipped into complacency without realizing it? "It was interesting," I finally said, turning to face him. His blue eyes met mine, questioning but patient. "Janet stopped by this morning. She shared something rather surprising." Richard raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "Really?" Janet's usually pretty reserved. I dried my hands slowly, weighing how much to reveal. She and Carl had a conversation about their marriage. A deeply honest one. It seems they've rediscovered something they thought they'd lost. Richard's expression softened, sensing the deeper meaning behind my words. His hands reached gently for mine. "And you? Did that make you think about us?" I felt a flutter of surprise at his directness, the way he saw straight to my heart. "A little," I admitted softly. "It made me wonder if we've grown too comfortable, Richard. Maybe there's more for us, too." For a moment, the kitchen was silent, the quiet punctuated only by the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the distant ticking of the clock. Finally, Richard smiled, his expression calm, sincere. "Maybe you're right, Laura," he murmured, pulling me closer. "Maybe it's time we rediscover each other again." Something in his words resonated deeply, stirring emotions I hadn't fully recognized. I felt warmth bloom inside me, a feeling I'd almost forgotten existed. I touched his cheek softly, a new tenderness flowing between us. But just as we leaned into the comfort of that moment, our peaceful connection was gently interrupted by the chime of the doorbell. Richard chuckled softly, stepping back reluctantly. "I'll get it," I said, smiling warmly at him. "Hold that thought." Opening the front door, I was surprised to see Janet standing on the porch once again. Her face held a different expression now, uncertain, almost apologetic. "Janet," I greeted gently, immediately noticing the tension in her posture. "What's wrong?" "I'm sorry to bother you again, Laura," she began, her voice hesitant. "Carl had to leave town unexpectedly. Work-related. I found myself sitting alone, and I suppose I just needed company tonight." Without hesitation, I opened the door wider, warmly welcoming her inside. "Come in. You're never a bother." As we settled in the cozy warmth of my living room, Janet's gaze drifted around, as if noticing my home clearly for the first time. A soft lamp bathed the room in amber hues, casting gentle shadows over family portraits, bookshelves, and worn furniture that had witnessed decades of laughter and quiet evenings. Janet drew a slow breath, appearing vulnerable once more. "You know, Laura, I spent most of the day thinking about our conversation this morning. It felt so freeing to open up like that. But tonight, alone, all those worries crept back in." I nodded, understanding perfectly. Honesty can feel liberating and frightening at the same time. But Carl seemed to respond well, didn't he? She smiled faintly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Yes, he did. But I'm realizing how much courage it takes to keep going, to truly rebuild." Her words resonated deeply. I glanced toward the kitchen, where Richard was quietly busying himself, giving us privacy. "Janet, after our talk, Richard and I had our own moment of honesty. It was small, but it felt significant, like we opened a window that's been closed for years." Her eyes brightened with genuine warmth. "That's beautiful, Laura. Isn't it amazing how connected we all are, even when we don't realize it?" "Absolutely," I agreed softly, feeling a deeper bond forming between us. "Maybe these connections are what life's really about." She sighed, thoughtful. "Do you ever wonder what else we've missed by holding ourselves back?" I looked at Janet closely, sensing a question beneath her question. An undercurrent of longing. "What do you mean?" Janet hesitated, clearly weighing her words carefully. "I wonder if, by choosing comfort and routine, we close doors we should have explored. I love Carl deeply, but there's always been something undiscovered. Something within me I've been afraid to admit." I held her gaze gently, encouraging her to continue. "Sometimes," Janet confessed quietly, "I imagine what life could be like if I took more risks, shared deeper truths, embraced the parts of me I've hidden away." Her honesty struck a deep chord within me, stirring something similar, something buried beneath years of comfortable predictability. "I think we've all felt that," I murmured sincerely. "But it's never too late, is it?" Janet reached out impulsively, taking my hand, her fingers trembling slightly. "Laura, there's something else I haven't told anyone, something that scares me more than anything." I squeezed her hand gently, urging her on. "Tell me." She drew a deep breath, vulnerability coloring her every word. "When Carl and I were honest with each other, he admitted something else. He shared that he's always known I was hiding something, something about myself, something deeper I haven't fully acknowledged. Janet's voice shook slightly, tears shimmering in her eyes. He told me he loves me enough to want me to discover whatever that is, even if it means facing truths that change everything. Her words sent a shiver through me, a wave of empathy, understanding, and shared longing. Janet wasn't alone in feeling hidden truths tugging at her heart. I felt it too, the unspoken desire for deeper meaning, connection, and exploration. "What do you think he's referring to?" I asked softly, feeling my heart beating faster, caught up in the quiet intensity of the moment. Janet met my eyes with powerful honesty. "I'm not completely sure yet, but I think I'm starting to understand. And Laura, it's strange, but somehow I feel safer exploring these feelings here with you." A powerful silence stretched between us, rich, meaningful, and unexpectedly charged. My heart responded instinctively, understanding exactly what Janet meant. In this quiet, intimate moment, boundaries seemed blurred, but trust and mutual respect remained firm. I whispered softly, "we're all stronger when we face our truths together." Janet squeezed my hand gently, gratitude and a gentle warmth filling her expression. "Thank you, Laura, for listening, for being here, and for understanding." I smiled gently, realizing deeply, clearly, that Janet's courage had sparked something within me too. Something undeniable. Yet neither of us knew just how deeply these truths would soon alter the paths of our lives, drawing us together in ways we'd never anticipated. The days following that emotionally charged conversation with Janet felt different, like the landscape of my familiar neighborhood had subtly shifted beneath my feet. The comfortable predictability of my life was now tinged with an awareness I couldn't shake, an awakening of possibilities I'd never considered. I found myself noticing details I'd long overlooked. The gentle rustle of the willow tree in Janet's backyard, the scent of freshly cut grass that filled the morning air, even the rhythmic hum of lawnmowers from distant yards. Every small sensation now seemed heightened, alive with new meaning. Richard noticed the change too. He began leaving little notes around the house, on the coffee pot by my bedside, tucked inside my favorite novel. Small gestures that rekindled something quietly beautiful between us. Yet beneath it all, Janet's revelation lingered, pulling my thoughts back to the vulnerability we'd shared. One morning, a week after our last conversation, I was pruning roses in my front yard, the warm sunlight softening the gentle ache in my knees. My attention drifted when I saw Janet step out onto her porch, hands wrapped around a steaming cup of tea, her gaze distant, contemplative. "Good morning," I called softly, waving a gloved hand. Janet's eyes brightened when she saw me. "Laura," she responded warmly. "Care for some company?" "I'd love that," I said sincerely. Within minutes, Janet joined me, settling onto a wooden bench nestled among the roses. Sunlight danced through her auburn and silver hair, painting soft shadows across her thoughtful face. As she sipped her tea, silence stretched comfortably between us until finally she spoke. "Carl came home yesterday," Janet began quietly, a gentle smile touching her lips. "We spent hours talking, really talking, for the first time in years." "That's wonderful," I replied, genuinely happy for her. Yet I sensed something more beneath her joy, a hesitation she was struggling to express. She glanced down briefly, gathering courage. "Laura," during our talk, Carl said something else that shook me. He told me that if there's something I've always needed to explore, feelings I've hidden, parts of myself I've denied, he wants me to do it. He even said it would strengthen our bond. I looked at her, genuinely surprised. That's incredibly brave and supportive of him. Janet exhaled softly, her eyes shimmering with emotion. "It is. But the more I thought about his words, the clearer something became. Laura, these deep feelings Carl sensed, they aren't new. They've always been there. I just never let myself fully acknowledge them until now." I felt a delicate tension rise between us, subtle but unmistakable. "What are these feelings, Janet?" I asked gently, sensing how carefully she was weighing her words. She hesitated for a long moment, her gaze fixed somewhere beyond the roses, before finally turning to face me, eyes filled with an honesty that stirred something within me. "Laura," Janet said softly, "I've always felt a connection between us. Something special beyond friendship. Maybe it's the way you understand me, or how I feel safe sharing with you. I've tried to push these feelings away, but they're real. I needed you to know." Her confession hung in the air between us, beautifully vulnerable and deeply respectful. I felt my heart quicken, not with fear, but a gentle realization of truth. The warmth and comfort I'd felt around Janet, the tenderness in our shared moments. It suddenly made sense. "Janet," I finally whispered, my voice barely audible, "I've felt it too. Maybe I've always known, but I didn't allow myself to see it." She exhaled softly, relief and gratitude blending in her expression. "Thank you, Laura. Just hearing you say that, it helps." We sat quietly among the roses, the world around us bathed in golden sunlight. This revelation wasn't explosive or scandalous. It was soft, tender, and profoundly human. Our connection deepened, built on mutual respect and a shared emotional truth we could no longer deny. "What happens now?" Janet asked quietly, vulnerability evident in her gentle tone. I took a breath, gathering my thoughts carefully. "We allow ourselves to acknowledge these feelings honestly, to explore them respectfully, without pressure or fear." Janet smiled, her eyes gentle yet hopeful. "Carl told me that loving someone deeply means supporting their growth, even when that growth might take unexpected paths." "He's right," I agreed softly. "Richard and I talked about honesty too. Maybe it's time to live fully, openly. No secrets, no holding back." She reached out impulsively, gently taking my hand, our fingers intertwining naturally. Her touch felt warm, reassuring. Right. In that quiet moment, we embraced a shared truth, allowing ourselves the freedom to truly feel. As we sat silently, the sound of distant birdsong and the scent of blooming roses filled our senses, deepening this moment of personal discovery. We didn't rush it, didn't force clarity, just allowed ourselves to exist comfortably within the tenderness we'd found. Eventually, Janet stood slowly, brushing her fingertips across a nearby rosebud thoughtfully. "Laura, whatever comes next, I'm grateful. Grateful for your friendship, your understanding, for this honesty." "As am I," I whispered gently. "We'll navigate this together." She nodded softly, her expression warm, sincere. "Together." As she walked back toward her home, her posture was lighter, a peaceful resolve evident in her steps. For a long moment, I watched her retreating figure, my heart swelling with an emotional clarity I'd never before experienced. Yet even in that warmth, I understood clearly. This was only the beginning. Embracing our truths had opened a door, and neither of us knew exactly where the path beyond would lead. Later that evening, Richard found me quietly reading in the living room. He took a seat beside me, gently brushing a stray curl behind my ear, sensing my quiet introspection. "Laura, everything all right?" he asked softly. I met his gentle gaze, filled with trust and years of shared devotion. "Richard, I need to share something deeply personal, something important." He took my hand gently, his grip reassuring. "I'm listening." In that moment, sitting together in the gentle evening light, I understood what Janet had meant about courage, about being fully seen and loved without conditions. With Richard's patient, unwavering presence, I began speaking from my heart, openly, honestly, bravely. Little did I realize the path ahead would soon lead us all, me, Janet, Carl, and Richard, into territory we'd never imagined, strengthening bonds in ways none of us could have foreseen. Speaking my truth to Richard was one of the most challenging yet liberating moments of my life. As I opened up to him about Janet, about the deep, unexpected connection I had discovered, I watched his expression shift from confusion to surprise, and finally to profound understanding. He didn't interrupt, didn't question. He simply listened, his hand never leaving mine, steadying my nerves with his unwavering presence. When I finished speaking, silence gently filled the space between us. Richard squeezed my hand softly, exhaling slowly, thoughtfully. "Laura," he finally said, his voice calm and reassuring, "I always promised I'd love and support you in every way. That promise isn't conditional. Life's complicated, and our hearts can surprise us. I trust you, no matter where this journey takes us." Emotion flooded through me, tears softly spilling down my cheeks. I leaned into him, my head resting gently against his shoulder. "Thank you, Richard," I whispered sincerely. "I don't know exactly what happens next, but knowing I have your trust means everything." He smiled warmly, gently kissing the top of my head. "We'll figure it out together." The next few days passed in thoughtful quiet. Janet and I exchanged gentle glances across our yards, smiles tinged with new awareness. We didn't rush the conversation further, giving each other, and our husbands, space to process everything we'd shared. But beneath the quiet, a gentle certainty lingered, a truth neither of us could deny. Then, one tranquil afternoon, as I was sitting alone on my back porch, Janet walked quietly into my yard, carrying a bouquet of fresh lilacs from her garden. She looked peaceful, serene. "Laura," she began softly, handing me the flowers with a gentle smile, "Carl and I talked at length. About everything." "How did he react?" I asked, breathing in the sweet fragrance of lilacs. She took a seat beside me, her eyes reflecting calm clarity. "He understood, completely. Carl said he's known me long enough to see the quiet truths I've hidden. He wants me to embrace them, no matter how unconventional they seem. He's willing to stand beside me as I discover who I am." I nodded, touched by Carl's deep wisdom and compassion. "Richard said something similar," I murmured, the warmth of his unwavering support lingering in my heart. "We've been incredibly fortunate, haven't we?" Janet exhaled slowly, gazing out at the quiet beauty of our shared gardens. "Yes, we have. It takes special men to embrace truth with such grace." We sat quietly, savoring the gentle moment, allowing ourselves to simply exist within the warmth of mutual understanding. Finally, Janet spoke again, her voice careful yet resolute. "Laura, I don't know exactly how to navigate this new chapter, this feeling between us, but I do know it feels authentic, pure. It doesn't take away from our marriages. If anything, it enhances the depth of who we are." Her words resonated deeply, echoing precisely what I'd been feeling. "I agree," I whispered softly. "Maybe the beauty in all of this is how our lives, marriages, and friendships grow deeper by embracing honesty." She smiled warmly, reaching gently for my hand, squeezing it briefly, tenderly. "Exactly." Over the next few weeks, our lives settled into a new, richer rhythm. We spent quiet afternoons together, exploring our emotions through long conversations, shared walks along our tree-lined street, and gentle moments of quiet intimacy, always respectful, always honoring the commitments we cherished deeply with our husbands. Carl and Richard, in turn, developed their own bond, grounded in mutual respect and trust. Their quiet acceptance deepened our marriages, creating a dynamic where honesty, compassion, and understanding flourished. Months passed, and the subtle shifts in our relationships continued to deepen. What might have been perceived as complicated became beautifully simple in its honest transparency. We discovered something profound. Love, in its truest form, wasn't about confinement or limitations. It was about growth, authenticity, and genuine emotional connection. Then, one peaceful evening, our small group gathered in Janet and Carl's backyard, beneath strings of softly glowing patio lights. The scent of blooming flowers mingled with the gentle aroma of grilled dinner, laughter, and conversation flowing easily. As we sat together at the table, Richard raised his glass thoughtfully, looking at each of us with sincere warmth. "I want to say something," he began gently. "This past year has taught me more about love and honesty than a lifetime ever could. We faced truths that could have pulled us apart, but instead, they've brought us closer. I believe we're stronger now because we chose to embrace authenticity rather than fear it." Carl nodded slowly, thoughtfully. "Love takes courage, real courage. But I wouldn't trade what we've discovered for anything." Janet's eyes shimmered softly, her gaze warm as she turned toward me. "Laura, your courage inspired mine. Thank you for sharing this journey openly and fearlessly." I smiled softly, emotion welling gently in my throat. "No," I replied sincerely, "it was your bravery that showed me what true honesty looks like. I've learned more about myself because of you, all of you." We raised our glasses together, gently touching them in a quiet toast. The evening deepened into night, filled with laughter, quiet conversation, and gentle moments of reflection beneath a vast, star-filled sky. Later, as Richard and I walked slowly home, our hands intertwined gently. The peacefulness of the moment settled comfortably around us. "Laura," he murmured thoughtfully, his voice calm, reflective. "When Janet first shared her truth, did you ever imagine we'd end up here, so openly, happily embracing this new reality?" I squeezed his hand gently, shaking my head slowly. "Not at all. But it feels right, like something I never realized I needed until I found it." Richard smiled softly, pausing to look deeply into my eyes beneath the quiet glow of streetlights. "Love, in all its forms, always finds a way, doesn't it?" I leaned gently into his embrace, feeling the reassuring warmth of his steady heartbeat against my cheek. "Yes, Richard, it does." As we stood together quietly beneath the peaceful night sky, I reflected deeply on the journey that brought us here, the vulnerability Janet had shown, the courage we'd all embraced, and the truths we'd uncovered along the way. Life was richer now, more meaningful because we chose authenticity over fear, connection over silence, growth over complacency. And while the path had been unexpected, every step had led us precisely where we needed to be. In the end, what Janet had said about Carl wasn't simply shocking. It was transformative, profoundly beautiful, and deeply, authentically human. I knew now, with absolute clarity, that the greatest love stories aren't defined by rules or expectations, but by honesty, compassion, and the courage to truly see and understand one another. Our lives would never be the same again. Thank you for joining me on this beautiful journey. Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories.